Daniel Gilbert, CEO of Brain Labs, recently came out with a scathing critique of the report The Creative Dividend by creative reporting agency or creative measurement agency System 1. A lot of his critiques were not just aimed at this specific report, but also the measurement industry, the effectiveness space in general. And I couldn't help but agree with a lot of these criticisms. By the way, Brain Labs, it's a marketing agency. So his perspective was obviously coming from that standpoint, from the point of view of marketing operators. And what he really mentioned was something that struck a chord with me, having spent a lot of time, almost close to a decade, in the marketing space, both as an operator and later on in more recent years as a measurement practitioner as well. So I am more than aware of the kind of problems that he was talking about. So let's actually get into that. But first of all, I don't agree with everything he said, at least not in the way he was pointing out. So for instance, he did mention that a lot of the stuff is really like voodoo or some sort of cargo card science. This is not a phrasing that I would typically use because I am a firm believer in econometrics. I believe that scientific measurement can work if all the players involved, if all the stakeholders are working together, if all the data is collected properly and enough effort and collaboration and cooperation is there. So I do believe in scientific measurement. I'm a very firm believer in econometrics, which is the basis of things that I talk about, like marketing mix modeling or incrementality testing or causal inference. And I do think that marketers really need much better measurement advice. But it should be better than just lifting information from reports which are based on very large brands and just trying to apply them in pretty much everything. And not just large brands, but also in B2B, predominantly things which are applicable there, or for very large brands with massive budgets. Those things may not really be applicable to startups or scale-up or mid-market brands. I have personally worked with a lot of startup scale-ups and mid-market brands, brand making less than 10 million a month in terms of revenue, in terms of MRR. So yeah, we're going to get into all of that, but let's actually first look into some of the things that Daniel was talking about. I have, by the way, published a Substack article on this, and I would definitely encourage you to go through that. I will leave the link to that article in the description of this video. So it all started with this LinkedIn post by Daniel Gilbert. It was an absolutely scathing attack on some of the most fundamental things in that report by System 1. So the first thing that he obviously talked about was a very weak foundation of data itself. He said that the data was basically, first of all, self-reported, which is a problem. But even if it trusts that, but even then there are still some problems. So he pointed out that all of this data was actually coming from really big brands who were already successful. The whole point was to establish what actually works in marketing, right? So that was the whole point of it. And if you only look at what the big brands were doing in terms of marketing, what the really successful campaigns were doing, not just big brands, then it's a faulty approach to actually come to conclusion about what works, because you also have to look at other cases where these very same approaches may not have worked. So that's a very fair point. And cherry picking of data on what works in marketing, I actually made a LinkedIn post as well, and it did bring up some conversations. I extrapolated on the basis of the arguments that Daniel had proposed, and these are the things that I also pointed out, that any marketer worth their salt already know the importance of brand very well. Okay, and this is a very important point because we do see this remark or this proposal or this growth advice come from different quarters from time to time, that people should be taking money away from performance marketing and should invest in brand. This was also something that was suggested in the original creative dividend report that Daniel was critiquing, because there they had mentioned that high quality creative is something that's very important. Who doesn't know that? Every advertiser, it doesn't even have to be a very good one or a very experienced one, anybody would know that. Even an intern knows that, or even non-advertisers, non-marketing people know that. It's such common advice, right? So it's not even actionable, it's too obvious to even state. But yeah, so the problem has never been their inability, marketers' inability to understand branding's power, but it has really been a question of financial and cash flow problem. And this is where I'll take the liberty of, again, leveraging the experience that I have. It might come across as anecdotal, but I think a lot of what we're talking about, isn't it? I have worked with a lot of mid-market brands, like I said, and a lot of startups as well. And what I've seen across all these brands is the kind of cash crunch that's always there. And I'm not talking about the ones which are funded. I've worked with very few which are funded, but most start from a bootstrap position. They look at that as a separate profit center. They want that brand to work on its own, and they don't pour money from outside, and they want it to grow on its own. They do want returns as quickly as possible, and they want it to be consistently profitable. And if it is not operationally profitable, I've seen that it creates enormous amount of pressure on all stakeholders. That's the kind of complexity that performance marketers have to deal with. That's the kind of complexity that mid-market or mid-tier or scale-up brands have to deal with. So it is very weird to suggest these sort of brands that you should be taking money away from campaigns that are actually generating money for you right now, that is actually generating sales. Take money away from there and put it into something that will give returns hopefully in 6 months, or I don't know, like 1 year or 2 years time. First of all, that has to be pointed out much more clearly. What exactly do you mean by branding? What do you mean by branding activity? What do you mean by brand investment? Are you talking about TV, OOH? And if those channels, then what exactly will work there? So that's something that, again, will actually go back to branding experts or marketing experts who will have to take that decision. So measurement people giving that advice is an incredibly useless piece of advice, to be honest. I mean, if you ask me, and that's probably what Daniel was frustrated about, because he comes from the operator perspective, the people who actually get things moving, who actually get things done within brands, and for them to get that sort of hollow advice makes no sense. So that's the point. And unless that sort of a breakdown is present, that was my second point really, that what is the nature of the creatives, what's going to be the nature of targeting and placement. This is again something that Daniel has also spoken about in that article. And perhaps the most harmful is certainly going to be the overgeneralization. Like I said at the start of the video as well, lifting ideas from reports as some sort of a figure, like 87% of people already have made up their minds even before they come across your brand through searches as to what brand they're going to buy from. So basically it's that initial consideration set principle, or that a very small percentage of people are actually in market. The vast majority of people are not even in market, they're not even actively searching. There might be some truth to it, but that actual percentage might vary from case to case, and what actually applies to your case is going to be more important. You can already see there are so many nuances, but depending on the category and depending on the kind of competitors you have in that space, depending on the TAM basically and the total available market or the total amount of demand that's really there at any given point, all of these things will determine how much you can actually still grow and how much space is really there to grow, irrespective of what channels or what kind of marketing vehicles that you will be using. So there are just so many factors that are involved here, and therefore lifting findings from big brands who have a very different kind of growth trajectory, which is absolutely not really going to be applicable or replicable in the case of smaller brands or mid-market brands. I think that's very annoying, and that's something that I've also been talking about. This is a post that I had created. You should really be looking at timing. So if you have to go for brand investment, which might be very true, you really need to take into account as well proper timing. If it's not timed correctly, and if you're trying to go for brand investment, which again, like I said, it might have been a good idea, and in principle it can be a good idea, let me put it that way. But if you're doing it too early, when the brand is really not financially ready for absorbing that kind of investment, let alone being beneficial, it's actually going to result in financial ruin. It's going to ruin the brand. And I'm going to talk about in future about some cases that I've seen in the past of it really almost happening. But yeah, fortunately just in time there was a course correction. Startups, early growth stage, scale and brand ready. These are the 4 classifications that I made. Again, these are not watertight. I do not mean to say that's exactly going to be the case always. And also the figures that are there, like what really accounts for early growth, may be very different from different category to category, and also the characteristics. But the whole point is that you start off with always on performance, which is going to be very important. That's, you really need to push ads in front of people. So you need to invest there. You need to invest in search and meta direct response, and you need to invest in shopping and TikTok and channels like that, and which will give you like performance, right? It will give you sales now, and something that you cannot wait for. And over time, what that's going to do is it's going to give you some sort of a revenue base. And this is also a very important point. point. We have seen time and again people try to point out about something called a performance plateau. The performance plateau is a concept that was popularized by Dr. Grace Kite, exited founder of Magic Numbers, and Tom Roach of Jellyfish. They actually popularized this concept. This was how it actually looked like. So what it really means that there's an always-on performance activity, but you have to have some bump periods which will be given by brand building activity, which will in turn have synergistic effects on performance, thereby giving rise to its sustainability. But the point is that some people extrapolate it too much, and they say that you actually have to do this brand building activity very early on, and or that it doesn't depend on timing at all. That's what the point is sometimes, and I think that's problematic. That's my whole argument here. You need to have the kind of capacity to actually be able to absorb that. And first of all, these are not watertight separate things. There are things within performance marketing, incremental rolling reach on Meta, or the feeder strategy on Google, using the feeder strategy that John Moran had popularized. So there are so many things that can actually be categorized as helping brand, as helping acquisition, right? Something that helps in brand building, right? It's giving you exposure. So that is something that can be done through different kinds of performance campaigns as well. So it's very important to define that. But if you're talking about very heavy brand investments, like for instance television or outside hoardings, those are expensive investments, and the brand needs to be in the right position. So the timing is very important. Otherwise, it's just going to create an absolute cash flow disaster, and it's going to take a lot of time to get out of that. A lot of people will say that the more common example is probably the other extreme, where brand owners don't think about brand investments at all, and they're only going after performance marketing. That may be true, a lot of people are doing that, but I think that the reverse is also a genuine threat, and therefore it's important to be aware of this risk, because I see this growth advice being thrown around a lot nowadays, and I think brands need to be aware of this risk really. And the best way to look at it is to see it as a stage-wise thing, because if you are able to not only layer on this performance, and like I said, with performance you obviously have this pure performance kind of thing, and then within performance marketing you also have things which help you generate more reach and cold acquisition, and people not necessarily looking to buy now but slightly upper in the funnel. All of these people can actually also be targeted and acquired in your sort of funnel mix. You can do a lot of things within performance marketing and associated things. So for instance, email marketing is there and SMS is there, so retention plus organic, that can be a very valuable layer, a valuable activity that you can layer on with performance. And then you also have the digital branding that you can also start at a slightly more mature stage. The scale stage, probably when it has gone into that 2 to 10 million a month MRR zone, that's where you can also start like branding on through social channels, and probably spend some money on also paid branding activity on social or through YouTube maybe. And after that probably comes the stage where you can start spending more on heavier brand investment channels, like say television or outside hoardings. So this classification is important. This is a framework. And again, like I said, this is not watertight, this is not set in stone. This can be a little bit more flexible, and I think that really should be the mindset, that it's really the specifics of the operations and the specifics of the brand that should be more important, rather than some sort of a very rigid framework that is supposedly going to work for everyone in every single case. I think it's better to have that sort of flexibility going forward, so that you are able to take into account the specific realities of your brand and how it progresses. I would just end on this note, and that there's just so much that I've also discussed in Substack article, and I encourage you to read that. A lot of people are talking about different kinds of things, about limitations of performance marketing, and again, I have seen through MMMs how performance marketing actually is able to build a stable baseline as well over time. So I think that's really something that should be kept in mind. It's not something that if you just switch off, it's going to stop. So it's not like a completely linear thing. Lean growth models are rarely ever that straight line which is going up monotonically. It probably is a messier thing like this, which is much more messy as the name suggests, or as it appears as well. So yeah, I think that complexity, that sort of flexibility has to be built into any framework that you have to use. If you have to use any framework, I do believe, of course, you need some framework, but it should not be a rigid one, and certainly should not be based on data or based on findings that are from very big brands which are really not applicable to your case. It will be disastrous for you if you try to follow that for your mid-market brand. So yeah, if this was interesting, if you have questions about it, a lot of controversial points, of course, and controversy is good, and I think there should be debates about this. But yeah, if you have any questions, if you want to engage in conversations, I'm more than happy to always have those conversations. Do leave them in the comment below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.